This video is a general overview of how to calculate fully allocated costs. And what that means is actually, you can see down here, is looking at what is the dollar per unit of any product. How much is it costing you to make one product? That's what we're trying to do in a fully allocated cost calculation. And there's three categories. Now we can use any kind of categorization. We could even use a alphabetic categorization, but what we use is the sense of, we use the labor cost per unit, the material cost per unit, and an overhead cost per unit. We add those three things up, and then that becomes the total cost per unit, or the fully allocated cost per unit. If we compare that to a selling price, we can see the particular profit we will be making on one unit. And that's pretty important for us when we're trying to make money in the things that we're selling. I'm going to go through each of these sections a little bit so you can kind of have an overview about how to calculate each of these three areas. So the first is labor. And in labor, we ask ourselves two questions. How long does it take to make this product? And how much do the employees cost the company? What we're looking for is the particular employees that touch the product. This is what's called direct labor. It's not all the labor in the plant, it's really the direct labor. So that's all we're really considered about. So if you look at this, how long does it take to make it? Now, I'm hoping you can remember that you learned how to figure out how long it took to make a particular thing, to do a particular task. You really learned how to do that in IME 223, Continuous Improvement Fundamentals. There's three different ways of going about finding that, and we'll talk about that later when we talk about labor costs in a little bit more detail. The other is, how much do employees cost the company? And this is a little bit like saying how much the employees get paid. But in addition to what employees get paid, they also have benefits and vacation pay and things like that, and taxes in that. So when we look at this, we're looking at the time per unit, which is how long does it take. We multiply that by the dollars per time, or how much is somebody getting paid or costing the company when they're working on this, and that gives us $1 per unit for the labor costs. Now if we move to material costs, the questions are very similar, but the first one is, what quantity of raw material is needed to make this product? Now that's not only what's in the product, not just the weight of the product, but how much did you need to begin with in order to end up with this particular product? That includes all the waste associated with the raw material and any kinds of scrap or rework that happened. You want to know how much raw material was needed to make one product. Now that's going to be in some sort of quantity of weight, quantity of number, quantity of length, something like a quantity. And then the next is, how much does raw material cost? Now there's a whole bunch of different raw materials often that make up a product, and we figure out this for each of the types of raw materials, and then we add them up. So again, you can see this sort of simple unit analysis calculation. The raw materials per unit, how much is necessary to make it, and the dollars per whatever the raw material is, how much did the raw material cost? And again, just by cancellation, in unit analysis, that gives us $1 per unit for the materials. And the last thing we want to talk about is this other area. Now this area is called overhead, but it's really everything else. What else did we need besides the person who touched the product, the direct labor, and the raw materials that went into the product? What else is there? There's actually a lot. And you can imagine the machines that were used, the rent, insurance, supervisors. We might have machining oil. We might have advertising. There are a whole bunch of stuff that isn't included in labor and materials that needs to be included in overhead. So the question then is, how do we figure that out in dollars per unit? And this is actually a very complicated question. How do we allocate the overhead to the unit? I'm going to show you in the most simplest terms about how to do that. So what we do is we take the total overhead, which is everything else we didn't include in dollars, and we divide it by the total production. Now this could be per year, it could be per month, whatever it is, but the total overhead divided by the total production, that gives us $1 per unit. Now again, you can see what we have now is three parts that are all in $1 per unit, and we can add those up to get us the fully allocated cost. So we might want to continue to look a little bit more at what is in each of these numbers. So for the cost of the company, we're going to look at the actual pay that the worker makes. We're also going to add to that taxes, benefits, time off, educational, retirement, anything else that is a benefit to the employee. How long does it take? We're going to develop time standards. Maybe there already are time standards, but mostly you will probably be developing this. There's 3 ways: stopwatch time studies, work sampling, predetermined time standards, or an MTM. Those are 3 methods for figuring out the time. And you have to do this for each step in the process. Not just like, what if like assembly workers are going to be making less than machining people, so you have to break it up into the step in the process. So for material, what we want to do is we want to say, what is the quantity? Gallons, pounds. We have to include the scrap, the waste, the rework for each raw material. And then we want to look at the dollars per unit. How much do we pay for it? But there also might be quantity discounts. What if we buy a certain amount? Then we will get a discount. There could be recycling. If we take some of the raw materials that we didn't use and sell them back, in the case of metal, this is really common, we need to include that also. And then in the overhead, we just want to look for all the different other kinds of costs that aren't included, and the question is really about the allocation method. I showed you a very simple allocation method, but in the end, the question is what is the allocation method, because it makes a difference when we're looking at these things.